Now, I'm really excited to introduce you to our amazing co-founder and president, Katharine Zaleski. Before she founded or co-founded PowerToFly to help tackle gender disparity, she started off in media, and she had previously worked at the Washington Post as an executive producer. She was also head of digital news products. She's also been one of the founding managing editors of Now This. So if you've seen any of those videos on Facebook or wherever, you can have her to thank for those. Katharine was also named one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business and frequently writes and contributes to the New York Times, Quartz, Business Insider, Fortune, Forbes, as well as PowerToFly's own blog. So please go to those places where you can check out some of her amazing writing. Katharine, I'm going to turn the stage over to you and Manoush.
Great, thank you. So that was a very lengthy bio, and I appreciate it. I need to update some of those bits too. I don't think it's been updated since the pandemic, actually. So that's the world we're in right now. It's like catching up for the last 16 months or 18 months. So Manoush, who I'm going to introduce right now, has a lot of big media jobs, especially in radio, and is the host of the TED Radio Hour, and the co-founder of Stable Genius Productions, the co-creator of Zigzag, the podcast about being human. I was interviewed for the Zigzag podcast in 2019. I got a lot of people writing me after that and saying what a great interview it was, but I credit the interviewer for really drawing everything out. So I'm going to try to live up to that today. But what the Zigzag Project is doing, I think you're in sort of a new iteration of Zigzag at the stage post-pandemic, is really helping people find new meaning in this new world of work that we have, this new world of being human that we have. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. And it's fascinating. I mean, you've started out your first episode by really polling people. And I have to say, like, a lot of people are very unhappy with where they are right now. And so how are we navigating this world? How are you helping them?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to just add a little detail. So my main gig is hosting NPR's TED Radio Hour, yes. But I really feel very passionately about using podcasting and newsletters and interactive projects to help sort of people figure modern quandaries out. And I have this very wonderful audience that wants to figure it out with me. So the latest thing that we've been doing on the Zigzag podcast is, as you said, something called the Zigzag Project. And what this was, it's 6 episodes or 6 steps, depending on how you think about it, for people to get through a big work transition. If you're thinking about like resetting your career, resetting your business in some way, trying to better align your professional ambitions with your personal values. And that can mean something very different for all kinds of people. Like, how do you even begin to do that? I mean, I think of, one example is a friend of mine who works for Facebook. Every single day, she's like, I love my job, but the company that I'm working for, she curls her toes, right? And so I think, maybe it's not Facebook, but maybe it's other places where you work, where you feel like either the business model or the thing that you're making is not improving the world. And as much as you need to pay the bills, and as much as you might love the work that you do on a daily basis, there's a gap between that and like the meaning that you want to make of your life, right? And so the reason why I wanted to do this was to help people kind of slow it down a little bit, take a moment to really think through, how do you begin to do that? So each episode is a sort of, we have an expert on there who talks about a stage that you need to go through as you transition to make change in your career, your business, and then an exercise that we ask you to do as you go along as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I want to talk about the exercises too, but this is all happening when people are really reimagining work post-pandemic, right? It's like all the things that we were sort of racing through before and not really paying attention to. We've had time to reflect on it.
I think that's totally true, Catherine. And I think, this idea of aligning your personal values meant something different 2 years ago. People were like, I want to, I want to work in a way that, I can pay people equitably. I can make sure I have a diverse workforce, all of these things. But I'm hearing from more and more people that those values are also things that have nothing to do with work. Like, I want to be able to work so that I can also live. Like, there's way more people talking about how do I integrate my personal life into the work that I do, as opposed to, putting your nose to the grindstone and just going. People don't need to tell you, tired. They are tired. And so they're like, how can I re-energize?
Yeah. So I want to ask you, like, how do you go through that values or mapping for yourself? I did it actually, but I did it back in 2019, pre-pandemic, when I was having a bit of an identity crisis.
Oh.
And actually in the fall of 2019. So it was the fall before the pandemic.
Uh-huh.
And I started even working with a coach and like really writing this stuff down.
Yes.
Simultaneously, my husband was having his own identity crisis, and he actually took a course. So we were like in our respective, like at our respective desks, like writing down everything that we, wanted out of life. And maybe it was a bit of a midlife crisis, but it was a real, like, we had to sit down and map it and really write it down and think through it. So I'm curious, like, what you're advising on the radio, or what your guests are advising, at least.
I think for those of us who can afford professional help, like a coach, or therapy, all of those things, like therapy is more available now, but I think this is something you really like. Career coaches, like there's a reason why they are so popular, but they're expensive. And so what I wanted to do was to make this 6 sort of episode series that anyone could do anytime, because it's free, right? Like, I have a sponsor who I believe in their message. And so I feel really like that's me aligning my values with my ambition. I have this Jobs of Ohio said they would sponsor the whole season, which is great. Right. And so I can make it available to everyone. And to me, like, so the last expert I have on the podcast is Stacey Abrams. And she's pretty good. And
good expert.
Yeah. She said something like so amazing. She's like, nobody told me how to do things. Like, I don't, like, when people call me ambitious, like, nobody told me how to do that. I had to figure it out, and I have to like write everything down and set, like, she's very, very, like, she's like, you call me strategic. I just call that kind of thinking things through. And so, it does occur to me that a lot of us, like particularly women, particularly people of color, maybe have not had that ambition conversation. Like, how do you make a big idea come true? And so this is just an attempt to sort of do that in a way that anybody can do it at any time. And what's been interesting is, like, I won't name names, but there's, I hear from different people, like there's a media company that just offered a lot of buyouts a couple months ago, and dozens of people took the buyouts and then decided to do the project together to figure out what their next steps are going forward. So I love this idea of people taking it and working, creating their own sort of support groups, but using the framework. And I should say, like, so in the first episode, we introduced this concept of the neutral zone, which I had never heard of before, but maybe, if you work in corporate circles, this is something, I don't know. Catherine, did you know about the neutral zone?
I've never heard something called the neutral zone, and I did read the article, and I mean, what was interesting to me, and I would love for you to describe it, is that I always tell people the only constant is change.
Yes.
And that you do have to I tell this to people who report to me. I tell this to my children. It's like, yes. And so you have to sort of remain like pushing through that change. But tell us about the neutral zone. I didn't know if that was the same thing.
So this is from a researcher who did a lot of research into transitions, how the best leaders manage their teams for transitions. And so it was often used in a corporate sort of setting. But I think it actually really applies to each one of us as individuals. And it's this idea that before you, like, let's say you get another job offer and you're like, okay, I'm going to take it. I'm going to go. This is an amazing opportunity. That would be silly not to take it. Right. Like that. If you can, if your budget will allow it, like to take this time to process. It sounds so ridiculous, but I think we need to hear it. Like, what are you leaving? Why are you leaving? What do you want to take with you? What do you want to leave behind? Who are you now at this very moment before you go into this new identity or new job or whatever it is that you're going into? Like, and all this research is found that people who took the time, organizations, leaders, teams, individuals who take the time to sort of be in the neutral zone, to end the previous chapter before they start the next chapter, have a higher incidence of not going into crisis later. Now, I have to say, this was a big lesson for me. I quit my job in a huff in 2018 to start a company. I was super pissed off at the organization I was working at, and rushed to start a company and rushed to launch various sorts of projects. And the pandemic, we couldn't sustain our business partnership. My co-founder and I, the company still exists, but she just, we hadn't built in any resilience. We hadn't taken a moment, and that was in part because of financial pressures, but also I think mentally, we just didn't stop and figure out okay, wait, what did we just do? Let's be more thoughtful about moving forward. So this is also a project that clearly I made for myself because I needed it desperately as well. So each episode is taking you through, okay, so after you are out of the neutral zone, how do you move forward? The next episode is with Priya Parker. She's the author of The Art of Gathering, and talks about, I actually worked with her several years ago about visioning, but not visioning like you think visioning, a different kind of visioning. So sort of very methodically, but in a fun, creative, hopefully soulfully fulfilling way, figuring out what the heck are you doing in this next phase of our existence here on planet Earth, and how can you do it in a way that makes you feel like you're contributing to the world, but also creating a wonderful life for yourself. That's the goal, right? That's the bottom line goal. That's what we want.
Priya's got some very, her book on the art of the gathering, and I was at a wedding. She gave a toast at a wedding I was at, and she told everybody at the wedding how to communicate with each other. It made the wedding a lot less awkward. There was no assigned seating at the wedding, so it was actually perfect.
Good.
But I do think that people have to, it changes something that you have to actually sit down and think through and write down and make playbooks out of. When I look at the massive changes I made in my 20s with my career, I would call a couple people and get advice, but did I actually map things out about where I wanted to be? But part of it is I didn't even know where I wanted to be. I was deeply confused. I mean, I'm not saying I know exactly where I want to be now, but I have a lot of anchors now. I got to get my kids into school. My kids have to go to school. They have to get fed every morning. These things sort of calm you down a little bit more when you're in your late 30s and 40s. But so what would you advise for people who still haven't really figured it out?
Well, I think that's interesting that you point that out, because I was expecting to have mostly women, which it was. 4,000 people have taken the survey, the intro survey for the project, and 70% women, definitely. But I sort of thought, okay, they're going to be mostly in their 30s and 40s. And actually, I have a lot of people coming right out of college, and wow, yes, like you say, there's not a lot of guidance that they get, but I think just figuring out what your North Stars are, it could be helpful. I didn't do that. I rushed from one job to another in my 20s, and I wish I had taken them. I wish someone had asked me. Nobody ever asked me, so what do you want your life to look like? When do you feel best at work? What are the skills that you feel like you've started to develop? Just really basic questions. I also heard a lot from retired people, which people saying I didn't think this project was going to be for me because I thought it was about young people, reinventing their lives. But actually, retirement is a reinventing of my life, and I still have so much energy, and I have so much experience, and I need to figure this out for myself, what I'm going to do for these next, decades, right? So, and I think, and that comes back to the name of the podcast is Zigzag, right? That's what we're doing here. It's not like, you do the project one and done, you figured out the meaning of your life. Like, no, this is like, it's going to take these constant switching and changes. And then a pandemic comes along and you got to figure it out all over again. And then you have a baby and that changes it all over again too, but if you have, the belief that you have the tools to figure it out, maybe it won't stress us out as much as it does. That we can sort of coach ourselves, be better at coaching ourselves through these really big sort of freaky moments. Because that's what I hear from a lot of people is, like one woman was like, I am, writing you this email from my dad's office where I go every day to cry because I don't know what I'm going to do with what I just feel like immobilized by what's going on in the world. And so like, if I can be a trusted friend in any sort of way, then that gives me a lot of meaning. And I, the other thing that really keeps me going is in that survey, 20% of the people responded said that because of the pandemic, because of the sort of awakening that this country has had to so many different issues, that they have decided that they want to do something different with their career, and that they want to, I don't want to use the phrase give back, but that they want to be part of some of the solutions that we need to find as we go forward. I mean, that's kind of huge, Catherine. Like clearly the people who are here care very deeply about a lot of those things, but like if 1 out of 5, if that translates in any way to how we go forward with like employment, if 1 out of 5 people in my little survey are saying, I'm going to upend everything in my career because the way I see the world has changed so dramatically in 2020. Like, I think that's going to be an interesting trend to watch over the next 5 to 10 years. We know that like Gen Z cares very much about this idea of having meaning and values in a corporation, but how much are they going to hold people accountable to that? And how much are there going to be new businesses that come out of this?
Right. Yeah, my question of that is like, there's so much energy out there about people talking about wanting to make change or going after or holding companies accountable, but the real change will happen when people actually like put their heads down and do the work. And I'm not saying people aren't doing that, but that's what I would like to see, that trend. Less talk about the work, more doing the work, which brings me to a question around like the motivations that have come out post-pandemic. When I started my career in the early aughts, 2005, I was actually at the old Huffington Post office today that we started the company out of in 2005. I was such an externally motivated person.
Yes.
I just loved it when someone, Twitter and Facebook didn't even exist at this point. I mean, Facebook had just been invented, but like, all I want, like if I would just be like trying to get recognition on Twitter and Facebook all the time. But like, I just wanted people to tell me I was doing a good job all the time or like get some sort of recognition. And sure enough, I actually built a career where I did. And one thing the pandemic taught me was like, it just made me very internally motivated. Like I knew my company was going to come apart, for example, if I didn't focus on the team every single day and do the work in there. And I think part of it is like, all these pressures that were happening on the pandemic, like parties, lists, people being outside, people like being at the right place, right town, all these, we didn't have that for 16 months. So are you hearing people say like, I want to go back out and get a lot of external good feelings again? Because I can understand that. Or people saying like, I want to sit at home and still do the work.
Well, I think, to me, that seems like a generational thing too. I mean, we hear so much about the creator economy right now, which is basically finding ways to use that external validation to make money and pay your bills. And depending on what your product is, if you think that TikTok is the right place for you to talk about environmentalism and it's doing well and you can pay your bills that way, who am I to judge, right? Like that is a whole another way to go. But yes, like one of the questions in my survey, which will come as no surprise to people, is like, what do you miss most and least about your pre-COVID life? and miss most was parties, miss least was parties. You know?
Right, or like going into the office, but yet you want to be with
Right.
people while you work.
I think the packed schedule, like I see it sliding back to how it was. I mean, you know, that's just my world that I'm in. But I know for me, I'm incredibly grateful for 2020 for telling me to like slow it down. Like
Yeah.
you like sitting on the couch, and that's okay. Like, and like, you know, for me, it's also like my kids aren't going to be home for that much longer.
Oh.
I don't know. I feel as a woman in media, I feel very conflicted about that because, you know, after a certain age, I think women in media definitely have a harder time. Or I saw someone put it as we get put out to pasture. I certainly don't want to be put out to pasture, and I certainly will have to pay for college. So part of me is like, how do I stay in the game and make sure I don't become irrelevant, right? That's the biggest fear, I think, for a lot of older women. But at the same time, I'm like, whatever, like these last few years of my kids being home, like what could be more important than that? Like nothing. So, you know, that inner conflict that we each have, you know, it could be something different for you. Maybe it's older parents, or it's friends versus your hobby that you have that means you need a lot of alone time, or whatever it is, that tension between your outer world and your inner world and your ambition and your values and your clock. And like, what do I want to change? I want to change that older women get put out to pasture. So like, and for me, it was deciding to go gray and white over the pandemic. I just was like,
yeah, well, it looks great. You look younger almost than, you know.
I'll take it.
People can't tell if I'm going gray because it's like blonde or gray. But yeah. Someone called it sparkles the other day.
No, I like that.
I mean, it's actually one of the reasons I started PowerToFly, but at the, you know, the ripe old age of 32, I was worried I was going to get put out to pasture. And we talked about that. Isn't that crazy? Because I had a baby, right? So I was like, oh my God, I'm done, you know? It wasn't like I was like, okay, I gotta like create a new gig for myself, which by the way is something that, you know, underrepresented people do. I'm not saying that but at higher percentages, because they feel like they're going to be put out to pasture.
And I feel like we should tell people that part of the reason why you were on Zigzag is because we reconnected, that you actually were part of a group of people interviewing me, and you were the only woman interviewing me. And I had just had my second child. And when I ran into you again 10 years later, I was like, you know, I walked out of that room and I always wanted to ask you, what did the men say when I said, well, I just had my second kid and I won't be able to work like crazy hours? And like, to me, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I wasn't in the room, but the person who was in the room is like, can tell me what happened. And you remembered, you were like, oh, I'll tell you what they said. You know, that's crazy.
Or what I didn't say. Yeah. It's like the fact that I just like sat there. I mean, I wrote about it in an article that was very popular, but back in the day, 6 years ago now, but yeah, but I honestly, like, the reason I kept silent was I just thought that's the way it is, you know? And now we've had a huge reckoning on all these things. But I wrote about that in 2015. So I was already feeling terrible about it back then. So, and hence PTF and other.
Yes. Well, you had your own like reckoning, right? Like.
Yes. Well, I've had many reckonings about my past career with the current one. So yeah, by the way, we're getting some really nice comments.
Oh, okay, cool. Let's do it.
So Segan says, would love to know what is bringing Manoush joy right now, or what is giving her hope? I don't really have one question. I've been like a terrible moderator in that sense. I've been hogging you the whole time, but.
Oh no, that's a lovely question. Thank you. I am trying to work-wise really take note of the small moments that I feel the most satisfaction. And for me, as a journalist / audio podcasty person, the moment, like I used to just gloss over those, but the moment when somebody explains something very clearly And it's also a beautifully scored sensation for the listener, that you could feel that the listener will connect with that person. That brings me like my heart is fluttering as we speak of it. And so like, well, if that like turns me on so much, I should just be chasing that all the time, right? Like, never mind about like growth and downloads and numbers and everything. If that's the moment, then I try to remind myself that that's what it's all about. Like all the frustration, all the other hard stuff, like that little pitter patter that I get when that happens.
Oh, I love it.
Joyful.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good note to end on. We also got some wonderful comments from Azrar. I know, really great. People want more. So we come back for the network. We'll bring you back. But we do have a networking hour coming up. So, or next 30 minutes. So I've been told to wrap it up. Is someone going to come and kick us off, or do we literally?
I can come handle that for you.
There she is.
I just want to say, huge fan of the NPR hour. So thank you so much, Manoush, for that. And this was an absolutely wonderful conversation to get to listen to. I think this is probably just what we needed after a morning of a lot of structure, was that really relaxed, organic discussion between, people who have a history together. So thank you so much for sharing that with us all.